Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session of the HPhil seminar. It is a pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Alessandro Salice, who is a senior lecturer at the University College Cork in Ireland and research associate at the Center for Subjectivity Research at the University of Copenhagen. Alessandro's research lies at the intersection of phenomenology, philosophical psychology, moral psychology, and social philosophy. Recent work and publications focus on the nature of intentionality, both singular and collective, the structure and sociality of emotions, and the role of affective life in moral evaluation, self-understanding, and self-deception, along with the disruptions of these phenomena in psychopathology. Methodologically, Alessandro integrates classical phenomenology with analytic philosophy of mind and also engages with empirical sciences of the mind. And the central strand of Alessandro's scholarship is devoted to early phenomenology, especially the Brentano school and the Munich and Göttingen circles, and to bringing their insights to bear on contemporary debates in philosophy. The title of Alessandro's talk today is Subjective Appearances and Realist Phenomenology. We are very much looking forward to Alessandro.
Thank you so much, Felipe, for this kind introduction. I think I will stand. I prefer to do that. So first of all, I must say it's the first time for me to give a talk here, and it's an honor and a pleasure. So thank you so much, Felipe, for making this possible. I also want to make a small comment before starting. So there are different variants of the project I will be presenting today. One is more systematic, and that one is or has been conducted with my colleague and friend Hamid Tayeb at the Humboldt University in Berlin. Then there is a more historically focused, and that is an integral part of a book I'm currently writing on early phenomenology. And what I will be presenting today is a project that is somewhat in between. It's systematic, but it is also historically oriented. So some of the things that I will be saying today stem from discussion with my friend Hamid in Berlin. Although, of course, the responsibility for any mistake is on me. All right, so let me start by saying something that I suppose is really not controversial, which is the fact that I think there is very little that is not uncontroversial in philosophy of perception. But today I want to just start with an assumption. We take for granted that perception is a subjective experience that provides us with access to objects, facts, and events in the world. Now, given this assumption, the talk pursues three goals. The first one is this. It is to introduce two problems about perception, problems that should be familiar to phenomenologists, because phenomenologists discuss this problem in great detail. So the first problem is generated by the common observation that sometimes perceptions appears to misfire. So, for instance, one of the beloved examples by phenomenologists and by philosophers in general is the following. At T1, I perceive a stick immersed in the water as crooked. But then on closer inspection, at T1 and subsequent time, I realize that the stick is actually not crooked. So this common observation generates the first problem, which is what are illusions. And the second problem stems from an equally common observation, which is which shows that perception appears to go over and beyond what is actually given to the subject. So while only partial aspect of an object's O are given to me at any given time t, nevertheless, when I perceive the object, I perceive the object in its entirety, including all the aspects that are occluded to me. So when I perceive this bottle in front of me, there is just one aspect of the bottle that is given to me, and yet I perceive the food. So this phenomenon is called completion, or we can call this phenomenon completion. And then the question is, well, what is completion? So my first goal is going to be introduce these two problems or elaborate on them. The second goal is to show how the notion of subjective appearance as epitomized, I think, in some of the works of Husserl on perception. So how the notion of subjective appearance solves these problems. And to anticipate, this notion solves the problems in the following way. It tells us that illusion is a perceptual error, and then it says that completion is a cognitive achievement. Subject is active in some sense when he or she perceives the object. But I will also show that I think this view generates some problems, and I will mention especially 3 problems. And then the third goal that I'd like to achieve is to actually reject the notion of subjective appearance by reactivating the notion of objective appearance, as this notion was introduced and discussed and activated by early realist phenomenology. And then I will try to show that if we operate with that notion of objective appearance, then we are capable of showing that illusion is actually not a perceptual error, it is a doxastic error, it is an error in the belief, it's not an error in the perception, and that the sheer metaphysics of objective appearances is capable of explaining or solving the problem of completion. And I will also show, I aim at showing, I hope I will be able to show that, that these solutions will not generate at least the 3 problems that I attribute to Husserl's theory. Okay, so that's the plan. I will first introduce the idea of subjective appearances to solve the 2 problems, and then I will highlight these 3 problems that I think that view generates. And then I will first show how objective appearances show, or when we operate with the notion of objective appearance, we will become able to show that illusion is not a perceptual error. And then I will also, in the third and last part of this talk, I will also discuss how objective appearances solve the problem of completion. Okay, so let me start with the first item on the agenda. So what is Husserl's understanding of illusions? So in order to answer this question, I first have to say something about perceptions in general. So perception, as we know, are intentional experiences. They are perhaps the paradigmatic example of an intentional experience. And what is an intentional experience? Well, an intentional experience is intentional if and only if it carries what I would call truth accessible content. We can discuss in the discussion whether this expression is actually adequate. Husserl uses the term matter in the logical investigation to refer to this particular kind of content. So he writes, matter must be that element in an act which first gives its reference to an object, and reference so wholly definite that it not merely fixes the object meant in a general way, but also the precise way in which it is meant. So the matter not only fixes the reference of an act, but it also fixes it in a certain way. It says that it fixes the object of my act, and also characterizes or put that object under a particular description or under a particular spectral shape, as it is sometimes said. So then, if that is the case, for any intentional experience targeting an object O as F under the spectral shape F, if the matter is true, then the act is successful, it is veridical, we could say, in the sense that it targets O, and O in fact is, as it is interpreted or comprehended by the act. It is, in fact, F. But if the matter is false, then the matter can be false in 2 different ways. Either there is simply no object O to be fixed, so the act misfires simply because it doesn't, there is no object there that the act is actually targeting, or the object is there, but it is not represented in the right way. It is not represented in the way it is. Now, a false matter is necessary but it is not yet sufficient for explaining illusions and hallucinations. And the question is, why not? Why we cannot explain illusions and hallucinations based on the way I just introduced the notion of false matter? Well, because so-called empty beliefs, they too are intentional, and therefore they too carry truth accessible content. They have a matter. And so a belief too can be incorrect in the way I just portrayed. So suppose you come to the empty belief that Alessandro is Irish. Well, I exist, I believe, but I'm not Irish, as my accent must have revealed by now. I'm Italian. Or here is another way in which the matter of the doxastic matter can misfire. You might come to the belief that the present king of France is Irish, but of course there is no present king of France, so there is no object there to be fixed. But of course, incorrect beliefs do not qualify as illusion, nor do they qualify as hallucination. So then the question again is, what is specific about illusions and hallucinations? How do we capture those particular errors that we call illusions and hallucination? Now, in order to make progress on this question, I should say that I should introduce a new notion in Husserl general theory of intentionality, which is the notion of sensation. Now, we can say that empty beliefs and doxastic attitudes in general are not accompanied by sensation. Strictly speaking, this is a simplification, but I think it won't matter for my purposes today. By contrast, perceptions are accompanied by sensation. In fact, they are precisely defined by the fact that they are accompanied by sensations or illustrative sensations. So what are these sensations? Now, in Husserlian framework, sensations are experiences, but they are not. They do not carry content, and therefore they are non-intentional. Remember that we are defining intentionality by or in virtue of the property of carrying truth accessible content. So if an experience does not have truth accessible content, then it is intentional. And importantly, this sensation provides the act with what Husserl calls in German Leibhaftigkeit, which is nowadays known in philosophy of perception under the label of presentational phenomenology. The idea is that when an act is accompanied by illustrative sensation, then the object of the act is perceived or is has the sense of being there, of being in front of me, of being present to me in the flesh, as sometimes it is said. Because beliefs lack illustrative sensation, they also lack Leibhaftigkeit. So when you have an empty belief, you can have beliefs about objects being such and such, but the object of that belief is not given to you as being present there in the flesh. All right, so now we can, I think, answer the question of what is Husserl's understanding of illusions. We can say that illusions are perceptual error. So if I undergo an illusion, so let's say I perceive the stick as crooked when immersed in water, then I perceive an object as being crooked, as being F, but the object is not crooked, is not F, doesn't carry that property. And so in addition to that, my experience is accompanied by Leibhaftigkeit, by presentational phenomenology. And so I perceive the crooked stick as being there in the flesh. Now compare illusions with hallucinations. Hallucinations too can be said to be perceptual errors. If, let's say, I perceive a black cobra now moving in this room, then I perceive O as being F. But of course, in this case, there is no O, so I'm hallucinating a black cobra, and this again qualifies as a particular perceptual error. And yet, even in this particular perceptual error, the experience is accompanied by Leibhaftigkeit or by presentational phenomenology. The cobra it appears to me as really being present there, as being there in the flesh. Okay, so I can now progress onto the second problem. So, what is Husserl understanding of completion within the framework of intentionality that I've just depicted? And in order to answer this question, I should be slightly more specific about the role of perceptions in perception. This idea that sensation illustrate the matter of perception. Or as I say here on the slide, that sensation populate perception. All right, so start with the idea, which is slightly controversial, but again, we can discuss this issue in the Q&A. The idea that the matter of the perceptual content is conceptual, in some sense of conceptual. And now, if the matter is conceptual, then the matter or the concept that is instantiated by the matter that is identical with the matter has two elements, as it were. It has an intension with an S, and it has an extension. Now, the extension is the object it refers, the concept refers to. So let's say the singular term my mag expresses a concept, a singular concept, and the extension of this concept is the mag or the bottle here on the table. And now, importantly, the object, the concrete object, the physical object out there has parts, both abstract parts and concrete parts. So the bottle of the map, whatever, as a body, as an angle, a base, a rim, an interior, an exterior, a foot, a shape, a color, weight, active properties, maybe aesthetic properties, maybe aesthetic values, and so on and so forth. These are all parts or constituents, as it were, of the physical object. And thereby of the extension of the concept. But the concept also has an intention with an S. What is an intention? Well, I think Husserl here operates in the logic of his time, and the intention is construed at that time as a set of marks or Merkmale, to use the German term. And these marks are nothing else than partial concepts, as it were. Partial concept that refers to the parts of the object. So the concept my mag has its marks, the mark of body, the mark of handle, the mark of base, the mark of rim, and so on and so forth. Right, so now the next point is to say that a conceptual mark can refer to the part of an object in two distinct ways, in at least two distinct ways. One way in which the mark of the concept or of the matter of the act can refer to the part of the object is in a so-called intuitive way. What does that mean? Well, it means that the subject is living through a sensation. So there is, as it were, a sensation in the conscious workspace of the subject, as it were. And that mark interprets or apprehends that sensation. And in so doing, the sensation intuitively fulfills the mark of the matter or of the concept. So, for instance, in perceiving the bottle here, I deploy the concept of bottle, and the concept of bottle contains the mark, color of the interior surface of the body of the bottle. If I'm at the same time I'm living through an experience of sensation, if there is a sensation in the workspace of my consciousness, which is interpreted by the relevant mark, then in so doing, the sensation intuitively fulfills the mark. So that's one way in which the mark can refers to the part of the object. But there's another one. The marks can refer in an empty way. Sometimes it's, as Husserl says in the logical investigation, in a designative way. So here, there is no sensation that the subject is living through, that the mark interprets or apprehends. And so in perceiving the mark, or the bottle, I deploy the concept of bottle, and that concept contains the mark, color of the interior surface of the body of the mark, the bottle, but now there is no sensation that is interpreted by that mark, and so the reference is empty. Now, importantly, only a fraction of the matter sets of marks, the class of marks of the matter, is fulfilled at any given time t. At point t1, a different point in time, other marks of the matter will be intuitively fulfilled. And this gives us the possibility to define the salient notion of appearance that is important in this context. So Husserl defines a subjective appearance as the sum of the sensations fulfilled marks of a matter at any given time t. In other words, we always encounter an object O, if there is an object O, in a subjective appearance. So anytime I perceive, say, this bottle is given to me in a subjective appearance because only a subset of the set of the marks of my concept that I'm deploying is intuitively fulfilled at any given time. Right, so remember my question, the question that I'm trying to answer here is, what is Husserl's understanding of completion? How is it possible that even though only one aspect of the bottle is given to me at any given time, I nevertheless perceive the full bottle? And one way, I think, of formulating the answer that Husserl gives to this problem is by thinking of completion in terms of a cognitive achievement. Now, remember, subjective appearances are the marks of a matter F, or a concept F, that are fulfilled by sensations at any given time t. And then what happens in completion is that I realize that, say, appearance 1 at time t is an appearance of the same same object O that is given to me in appearance 2 at time t1 if I understand that appearance 1 and appearance 2 belong to the same matter F. In other words, if I understand that they are different sets of marks belonging or wherever to the same concept or matter. Or, as Husserl says, if I synthesize or bring to coincidence appearance 1 and appearance 2 under the same matter F. Which goes to show that to perceive O always is to perceive O as F. So you really need or require that a spectral shape in order for the full object to be given to you in its entirety in perception, even if only certain aspects of the object are given to you at any given time t. All right, so now let me turn to 3 problems that I think this view generates. Now, let me be straightforward here. I don't think any of these problems are deadly to the theory. Perhaps Husserl has the resources, or Husserlians have the resources to deal with these problems. But I will introduce them nevertheless, and I will say that given that we have these problems give us sufficient reason to look into a different theory of perception. So what are these 3 problems? The first problem is this. Now, according to Husserl, according to the theory that I've just presented to you, illusion should be, at least in principle, corrigible. And why is that? Well, because remember, perceiving O is nothing else than having subjective appearances of O as F, and subjective appearances are intuitively fulfilled marks of the concept F. Then it seems to be following from this that if the perceiver revises the concept F, then the subjective appearance should change, thereby establishing veridical perception. However, illusions are not, at least there are several illusions that are not corrigible in this way, even when one realizes that there are illusions. If you are familiar with the famous Müller-Lyer illusions, you have the 2 segments, and they appear to you as being different in lengths, and yet when you measure them and you figure out that they are actually of the same length, nevertheless, revising the concept that that you are deploying will not re-establish veridical perception. You still perceive the Miller Lie segments as being different in length, even though you know, and therefore you are deploying the concept being equal in length. So this is one, prima facie, this is one problem for the theory I've just presented. What is the second problem? Now, the second problem relates to the following idea. Now, according to Husserl theory, it should not be possible for two subjects, S and S1, to share an episode of joint attention towards an object O, if either of them, if either of the two subjects lacks the concept F of O required to perceive O as F. Now, why is that? Why is it that if, say, an object is in front of me and in front of Felipe, if either myself or Felipe lack the relevant concept, we cannot establish joint perceptual attention towards the object? Well, for the following reason, we have said that perceptions depends on perceptual contents or matters. So you need to have those perceptual contents or matters in order to perceive O as being F. Now, if a subject has, for whatever reason, not acquired the concept F of O required to perceive object O as F, then S will not be able to enjoy a perceptual experience of O that is qualitatively identical with the perceptual experience of O enjoyed by a second subject, S1, who, however, has acquired F and is capable of deploying F when perceiving O. Then the consequence of this is precisely the one that I highlighted a second ago. In the presence of O, S and S1 cannot share an episode of joint attentions towards the object O, since one subject cannot enjoy a perception that is qualitatively identical to that of the other subject. However, as I think each and every one of us in this room has already experienced, in the presence of O, joint attention among S and S1 can be established deictically and in absence of any descriptors or concept or matter F. So if this object is in front of me, and if Felipe is looking at this object, even if I lack the concept of a bottle, and Felipe has the concept of the bottle, nevertheless, it is possible for us to jointly perceive the object. And so that, again, seems to be, that seems to exert some pressure on the view that I have reconstructed. And then the third point is that, as I said, all perceiving, according to Husserl, at least at its bottom, leaving categorical perception aside, all perceiving must be cashed out in terms of perceiving O as F. But intuitively, in order to perceiving O as F, you must first perceive O as such. Right? So intuitively, it seems that perceiving O as F presupposes something more fundamental, which is precisely perceiving O, without putting O under any aspectual shape or description. All right, again, I don't think these, I won't be arguing today that these are knockoff arguments against the idea of subjective experience, but I think this should encourage us to look into an alternative theory of perception, one that has been developed by some of the members of the Munich and Göttingen circles of phenomenology. Now, these phenomenologists oppose, I think, the view that I've just attributed to Husserl. They argue precisely along the lines I have indicated a moment ago. They argue that perceiving O as F relies on a more basic and fundamental experience, which is perceiving O, period. Now, what is perceiving O? I'll try to characterize in the course of this of my presentation, but at its bottom, perceiving God is not an intentional experience in the sense in which Husserl described intentionality. So perception is not intentional in the sense of being an experience that carries truth accessible content. It doesn't, in other words, perceiving God, according to these phenomenologists, doesn't carry a matter. Rather, they describe, or at least some of them describe this experience as being relational experience. Now, what does it mean for an experience to be relational? Now, since relations presuppose, since the existence of relation presupposes the existence of the relata, then by necessity, if perception is relational, then if one lives through a perception of O, then one is acquainted with O. Not only the perception exists, always by necessity, the object of that perception must exist as well. But this implies that perception simply cannot misfire, because living through a perception is establishing a relation with an object. But then if perception cannot misfire, then how are we supposed to account for hallucinations and illusions? Now let's start with hallucinations. I will be brief on this. The answer that phenomenologists give to this question is by activating what has in subsequent decades become known as the disjunctivist move. So they just argue that hallucinations are not perceptions. They do not belong to the same psychological kind of perceptions. So one is not perceiving if simply there is no perceived object of. One is living through an experience that is of a different kind than the one of perception. An hallucination, writes Scheler, is a delusion in which we merely believe to perceive without actually perceiving. So yes, the hallucinator believes that he or she is perceiving something, but that belief is wrong. They're not actually perceiving anything, because perception is relational. And anytime we perceive something, the object of perception must exist. Now, this, of course, leaves open the question, what then are hallucinations? But I'll leave this question aside. Rather, I would like to move to the second question, which is more important to my purpose. So what are then illusions on this account of perception? So what is the early phenomenological understanding of illusions? And in order to answer this question, I first have to start by saying that in perception, the subject always is acquainted with an object O to the extent that that object O is in an appearance. So if that is right, so perceiving the straight stick outside the water is to be acquainted with the stick in its appearance of being straight. And similarly, perceiving the crooked stick immersed in water is again to be acquainted with the stick, but now in its appearance of being crooked, not being straight. All right, so this is just the starting point of an account of illusions, because of course, I still owe you an explanation of what appearances are and how then we should understand illusions. So let's start with this idea or let's start with the first question, what are appearances? Now, appearances, say early realist phenomenologists, well, they're not subjective, as Husserl would like to have them, but they are rather objective. They are part, as it were, of the inventory of the world. So here is Paul Linke, who writes, "We deny that the adumbration or appearance belongs to the realm of consciousness, sensation, contents, presentation, experiences. We rather claim that it, as a matter of principle, must be conceived of as objectual." Here is Scheler. "There are physical appearances, that is, appearances which never originally were contents of consciousness or psychical, which in no sense can be derived from or be grounded in the psychical domain." Now, are objective appearances mediating entities? that is, entities that are numerically distinct from all and its properties, and that stand, as it were, between the subject and the object. Well, I should say some early phenomenologists actually go in that direction. Paul Linke is somebody who thinks of appearances in those terms. But there is a consistent group of early realist phenomenology that answer very clearly to this question by saying, no, they are not, appearances are not mediating entities. So here is Reinach, one of my beloved early phenomenologists, who writes, too much confusion in philosophy has been caused by making the appearance of an object into a proper object, that one then contrasted with the appearing object as an independent something, with which it should stay in relation of equality, similarity, or dissimilarity. All right, then what are objective appearances? And here I'm going to offer you a three-step analysis, one that is slightly more systematic and less anchored in the textual evidence. I think ultimately this view can be defended also from an historical point of view, but I will spare you the historical details here, just go into the philosophical substance of the analysis. Right, so the first step in the analysis of objective appearances is by identifying what Hamid and I call aspectual properties. Aspectual properties are polyadic properties. They are, in other words, relations. They are exemplified by the object, by each and any physical object, together with many other relata. Typically, these other relata are the source of illumination, in this case, the lamps over there, the size of the adjacent object, maybe the size of the perceiver, or the position of the perceiver vis-a-vis the object, and so on and so forth. Now, importantly, aspectual properties, as all properties, are abstract entities. Right? They're not concrete and they're not particulars. They're just abstract general entities. The second part of the analysis is by introducing the exemplified aspectual property, which is what we call the objective appearance itself. So if the abstract general aspectual property R is exemplified by an object O, let's say this bottle over here, by a source of illumination W, and by many other elements, then the object here has acquired an objective appearance, say objective appearance X, where X is precisely the individual exemplification of the aspectual property R. Now, if that relation dissolves, O does not have that objective appearance any longer, but will have acquired a different appearance Y. So if we turn off the lights, then O will stand in a different objective appearance, because the aspectual property has now been exemplified by a different source of illumination. Now, let me be clear on this, that this change from an objective appearance into another objective appearance is what we might describe that a Cambridge change. So nothing in the bottle has changed in the transition from appearance X to appearance Y. The object has all the properties that it has. It's just that it appears differently, right? Because because the spectral properties has been exemplified by different relata. Of course, the fact that this is a Cambridge change, and then the fact that nothing has changed in the transition from X to Y doesn't include the fact that there has been an acquisition and a loss of the relative objective appearance. So this is the second element in my three-step analysis. So the first one was the abstract general property, the spectral properties. Then we have the exemplified properties. And then the third step is the appearing object itself. This is the third element in my tripartite analysis. So insofar as a physical object acquires an objective appearance, it is an appearing object. So the appearing object, as it were, is an accidental compound. Sometimes it is called in Aristotelian metaphysics. So it is the individual object to the extent that it exemplifies an spatial property. The individual object O in its appearance, as it were. And given its relational nature, perception always is, as I was saying to you, acquainted with an appearing object. So remember, I told you that perceiving O, according to realist phenomenologists, is perceiving O in an appearance. And that just means being acquainted with an appearing object. All right, so now that I have introduced the notion of an objective appearance, let me try to formulate an answer to the question of what is the early phenomenological understanding of illusions. I want to do two considerations here. The first one is that objective appearances are, we might call them pro tanto justificatory reasons for perceptual judgments. So what do I mean by that? It means that the objective appearance gives you one sufficient reason to form, or is one sufficient reason to form the corresponding, or to form a perceptual judgment. But appearances are just pro tanto reasons, they are not pro toto reasons. The pro toto reason is the whole things considered reason, which includes other pro tanto reasons, for instance, the perceiver background knowledge. I will give you an example on how all this bear on the question, on the questions about the nature of illusions in the next slide. So bear with me for a second. The second consideration is that some appearances are misleading. And an appearance can be said to be misleading if it leads the perceiving subject to form incorrect perceptual judgments about O. An incorrect perceptual judgment about O is one that is mistaken about the intrinsic properties of O. That takes some appearance properties to be intrinsic properties of O. All right, so now I think I've given you all the elements. We have now all the elements to answer the question of what are illusions on this view. In illusions, the error is not in the perception itself, and not in the experience of perceiving O itself, but it is rather in the belief that is grounded in this particular experience. So, for instance, to go back to my example, the objective appearance of a crooked stick immersed in water is misleading, in the sense that it invites the perceiving subject in forming the incorrect judgment that the stick is crooked. However, the perceiver might have other pro tanto reasons that overpower the epistemic force of the objective appearance, which, remember, is just one pro tanto reasons in favor of the judgment. So, for instance, if the perceiver possesses background knowledge about refraction, if he or she is knowledgeable about refraction, then the perceiver will not be misled by the objective appearance. So they will block the formation of the incorrect perceptual judgments, while obviously still perceiving the stick crooked immersed in the water. So here are some quotes that substantiate the point. Here is Scheler. I do not feel myself active in the illusion, but rather an appearance is given for something which is not. In the error, by contrast, I am the one who cognizes, interprets, and so on. And the error is the result of this cognition or interpretation. Now, let me say that this solution to the problem of illusion is actually very old. It's not something that early phenomenologists came up with. It is really anchored in the Aristotelian tradition. I just want one quote in this wonderful book by St. Anselm and the Veritate, but you can find many other quotes in various other texts of this tradition. So St. Anselm writes, so when a stick, part of which is underwater and part not, is thought to be crooked, or when we think that sight finds our faces in a mirror, and when many other things seems otherwise to us, sight and the other senses report what is, For it is no fault of the senses that report what they can, as they can receive it, but it should be imputed to the judgment of the soul, which does not discern well what the senses can do or what they ought to do. So phenomenological realist view about perception gives a solution to the problem of illusion, or give an explanation of what illusions are. But I would claim this view also bypasses the three problems that are generated by the idea of subjective appearances. Why? Well, remember, the first problem is that if we buy the idea that appearances are subjective, then eventually we should come to think of illusions as being in principle corrigible. But that doesn't seem to be possible. Remember, the Müller-Lyer case proves that we cannot correct visual illusions. Now, the view that I presented to you about objective appearance does not incur in that problem. And why is that? Well, illusions cannot be corrected because illusions are not perceptual errors. They are only doxastic errors, and doxastic errors can be corrected. The second problem refers to the problem of joint attention, triadic joint attentions, which seem to be impeded by the theory of subjective appearances. Now, the view about objective appearances that I have presented, again, does not seem to incur in the same problem. Why not? Well, because perceiving O does not require concept possession, and it does not require concept possession simply because it is not an experience that carries truth accessible content or matter. And so joint attention on this view can be established between two subjects S and S1, even if they or one of them lacks relevant descriptions of O, of the object O. And then the third, I think, positive fact about this view is that this view aligns with our intuition. In fact, it aligns with the idea that perceiving O as F presupposes something more fundamental, which is perceiving O. Yet, I think this view has a further advantage, and this has precisely to do with this idea of perceptual completion and the way in which this view actually just simply removes the problem from the picture. Let me explain why. So what is the early phenomenological understanding of completion? So let me answer this question by running just a purely metaphysical considerations about relations, about the nature of relations. Now, objective appearances, remember, are exemplification of spectral properties. Spectral properties are relations, so polyadic properties. Objective appearances are individualized relation. Relation R, as exemplified by the object O, the source of illumination, and many other relata. Now, obviously, it is a very important and difficult task to identify all relata of an appearances. And in fact, one especially important task here is to figure out whether the subject itself is a relatum in the set of relata. But I'll leave this question out for now. We can come back to it during the Q&A. But one consideration about the appearances set of relata stands to reason, and it is this consideration. Now, different appearances of O, different objective appearances of O, are different relations that keeps O constant at one of their relata. Now, if this is the case, then the perceptual transition from one appearance X, from one objective appearance X, to another appearance, objective appearance Y of O, keeps one of the relata fixed. And this is what Scheler seems to be suggesting when he writes, one must recognize that we perceive the self-same real object in both misleading and non-misleading appearances. It is in virtue of that a contradiction becomes possible between the two propositions, the sticky screw and the sticky string. So when an object, transitions from one objective appearance to another, there is still one object that remains constant in the transition, precisely because the objective appearances are nothing else than relata. But then, if that is the case, then by default, one perceives an object O across different objective appearances of O. So it is grounded in the very nature of perception to establish acquaintance with O in virtue of its relational nature. And grasping O through an appearance of O is not grasping O through any snapshot of O, because appearances are not snapshots. They're just relations having O as one of their relata. So then, let me be more precise here. So what is then actually the early phenomenological understanding of completion? Well, there is simply no problem of completion on this view. The problem derives from a subjectivist account of appearances. Now, if appearances are subjective, then of course the question emerges as to how the same object can be retained across different subjective appearances. But if the subject is acquainted with an appearing object, and that means, remember, with an object in its objective appearance, then the question as to how the object remains constant across different appearances just refuses application. On this view, on the view that I've just portrayed, the object is by default given together with all its appearances. So we don't need to ask about completion. Right? So the fact that this object is given now to me in this particular appearance and now in this particular appearance, just simply means that there is one object here that has remained constant in the variation of two relations, in two objective appearances. So the world, in other words, is in plain sight. We don't need to figure out how the mind reaches out to the object and is capable of keeping the object constant across different subjective appearances. No, the object is, by default, given in all its objective appearances. All right, I came to the conclusion, so let me briefly recap. What is it that I've claimed? Well, first of all, I claimed that there are objective appearances, contra the idea that appearances are subjective. I've also claimed that illusions are stochastic errors. They are not perceptual errors, as my target view argues for. And finally, I've said that the unity of O, the unity of object O in perceiving O, is yielded by the relational structure of objective appearances. And that goes against the idea that the unity of O in perception is a cognitive axiom. Now, because the theory of objective appearances avoids the problems that beset the subjective appearance theory, I think we should prefer this second theory. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. Now we have time for questions. Hello.
Okay, thank you very much. I have two questions. The first one is, I'm a bit puzzled that